How do you counter violent extremism without fueling stereotypes and racism in a way, Mo?
Well, I think the important thing when we're having these public debates is that they have to have nuance. And this is the problem, is that up until this point, if you look at a lot of the online debates, it's like, you know, you're evil, no, you're evil. And it's like, and it's these big generalizations of people. And often I'll debate people on various mediums, and the number one thing that always ends the debate, I find, is that people either want it to be all Muslims or no Muslims. That's it, right? You can't. It's like they're all terrorists trying to bring Sharia law, or they're all the most amazing people with like angel wings, and we cannot criticise anything. And that's just nonsense. I mean, we don't do that with any other group. You know, like we had the gangland wars in Melbourne, and for so many years, like a lot of them were Italian, but no one went and said it's all Italians or no Italians. It's a group of criminals. That's it. And the way that we can deal with this is by lifting the quality of the debate. We have to lift the quality of debate.
How do you do that?
Well, it's definitely challenging, but I think you've got to take emotion out of it. It's raw. It's very raw. It's personal. I know there have been things, I've read articles, and I've locked myself in my room for 3 days because or people criticise me and I start shaking on my keyboard. I don't know what to do. You have to take a breath and just think about the truth. Think about the truth. Take the ego out of it. It's hard, it's very difficult. It's very, very difficult. But I've found, like, I get people, all capitals, kind of,
It's usually
stuff.
bad.
Yeah,
sign.
usually. And the eggheads. The eggheads are the ones that kill me. It's like, put a profile picture. Come on. Like, seriously. And sometimes you'll think, okay, well, first I do question what headspace that person's in, but sometimes you can tell.
That's generous of you.
That's just. But if there's someone that's, I think we can have a conversation, I'll engage. And I do find that generally they can evolve, the conversation can evolve. But you've got to, I think, be sincere. You've got to take the emotion out of it, and also just know when to stop. But sometimes it's worth pursuing. I definitely think there is hope there.
Do you feel like you've changed anyone's mind by engaging with them online like this?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I've had people tell me that. I mean, I'm not like, hey, look at me, I'm amazing. But I'm just saying, I just think there is success in that approach. And I've had people, even through media work, people say, my whole life grown up thinking of this, but it's the way you do it. And I think there are too many people on both sides of this who are just in it to win. It's just about, it's a boxing match, and how can I smash you down, as opposed to two humans that honour your opposing side. It's very challenging. I know not everyone says that. A lot of people, especially with the Donald Trump stuff, say we shouldn't, or the Pauline Hanson stuff, saying we shouldn't give them any oxygen. They're bad people. We need to. But I think, as I said, again, don't stereotype everybody. Know when to pick the right person, and just give it a shot, and be sincere.
Your role as a comedian, I have to ask you about the role of humour in countering those views. How powerful is it?
So it's an interesting one. Comedy is a very mixed bag, and I actually decided to take a break from comedy because I felt that comedy can be a very powerful role as education, but it can also, that's where I think the stereotypes can come in, because it's not necessarily an educated conversation. It can be, if it's done really, really well. A comedy can educate people. If it's done really badly, all you're doing is you're pulling out the same old racist stuff. So, of course, like, a lot of my jokes start off like, my dad's a terrorist, ha ha ha, sort of thing. Dad tried to hijack a tram. It was one of like my very intellectual jokes. It was a great joke. People would listen. I have people come up to me after shows saying, same thing, I totally believed you're all terrorists. You made me laugh, but you made me think. And then after a while, what ends up happening is you get more addicted to the laughs, and I think your standard can drop a little bit. So comedy is hard work. People don't realise that, and I think you've got to, especially when you go into a mainstream space. So I think comedy can be very powerful, but you've always got to be careful not to just be addicted to the laughs. In fact, it's better to get on stage, say something that nobody laughs at but thinks, rather than just kind of going for the cheap thing. Because that's the problem, is you've always got to ask yourself, and this is the thing, why are they laughing? Are they laughing, at something that you've kind of inspired them with, or because you've just made, like, my dad's a terrorist joke?
Countering violent extremism. What is the difference between alter and counter narratives, and what would you like our audience to sort of hold on to?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a very tricky thing when we're talking about counter narratives, alternative narratives. In one sense, I think alternative narratives are kind of a stronger term. And what we're sort of saying in this, so the publication that both I and Widyan work for is The Point magazine. And what it tries to do is it takes the situation that is actually occurring right now. Let's talk about the fact that there is an international war. Let's talk about what's happening in Iraq. Let's talk about what's happening in Syria. And let's talk about what that impact is on local communities. And in fact, it's often the diaspora communities that are the first to feel the heat or the brunt of those international affairs. So we're not trying to say, and this is the same with the other work I do, we're not trying to say, let's counter that story or let's provide, what we're trying to say is let's actually talk about these real events and talk about the fear, and the fear in the same way that comes from far-right extremism. What is the fear that we are feeling right now as a nation? It's happening globally. It's a huge shift going on. And how can we provide, though, in that huge dross of information that is online, how can we provide stories that, exactly what Mo said, provide nuance, provide facts, provide details, give a holistic picture of what's actually occurring? How do we talk about these things in a way that isn't just one-sided? Because that, I think, counter-narrative sometimes can go into that extreme space itself, where it's just going to be about positivity and hope, which is also really important, but that sometimes misses the fear or addresses the real issue of what is going on. So I think alternative narratives are a really strong sort of starting place to go out and create as well, and that gives people something to work from as well.
Widyan, just on that point about positive stories, is there any evidence that positive stories actually work in providing, an alternative point of view, or in getting people to start thinking about the world differently or different communities?
I think, and this is currently what is happening, when people think of countering violent extremism or CVE, they automatically assume that it's some sort of mechanism to stop terrorism from happening or to change people's mind. And something that people always get bogged down in, particularly within the Muslim community, is they believe it's a form of intervention. You could argue that at a very simplistic, basic level, that it is a form of intervention. But the CVE that I do isn't about stopping terrorism. The CVE that I do isn't about trying to change someone's opinion to like me as a Muslim. What we do when we talk about countering violent extremism is adding that language issue. It's talking about if my uncles who are currently fighting against ISIS in Mosul are fighting there, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for my mother? What does that mean for my dad? How does it impact our community here? How does it impact the way an Assyrian Iraqi Christian relates to me as a Muslim Shia woman who's originally from Iraq? So we're talking about community dynamics, and to kind of, we always as humans want to measure the outcome of something or want something that's tangible to prove that this is working. I can't tell you whether or not our stories at The Point magazine are changing all different people's views, but I can tell you that we are certainly creating a platform where we're breaking the stereotypes, not about this is what multiculturalism is about, but it's breaking stereotypes related to what the government is doing in the CVE space, clearing up misconceptions that communities might hold about what government is doing. So we see ourselves as community in government, where we're at the basic level trying to provide that information, where we say to people, you can have your opinion, but here's the facts and here's the evidence to try and make you have an informed opinion. So when I talk about CVE, I don't for a second pretend that I'm helping people stop becoming violent extremists. That's not what I aim to do. That's not why we're going to work every day. We do it because we know there is an information and knowledge gap, and it's our responsibility as people who understand this space to fill that information gap, because knowledge is power, and that's, at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to.
In the age of, clickbait, how do you do that? How do you make sure that that narrative cuts through?
Yeah, I think with a lot of that sort of work, we're also dealing with, we use the same kind of tools. So we're looking at search engine optimization. We use Google, we're using YouTube, we're using all the tools that are to our advantage in the same way, to look at, keywords. What are people searching for? Looking at Twitter trends, looking at what people are actually talking about. And in a way, you sort of seed a story as well in that sort of sense. So you look at what the kind of narratives and what people are discussing online, and how can we provide more education in that sphere, because keeping in mind that this is also for government. So we are looking at a kind of educative platform as well. If people are talking a lot about certain laws that have come out, what can we do to actually explain those laws and what those direct impacts may or may not be on individuals or on people? So, we are definitely looking at the trends that are happening. But another thing, a lot of this evidence is also anecdotal in a lot of ways. So a lot of it comes through direct messaging that we receive. A lot of it comes through outreach programs that we try to also do, and training up young people to talk about these issues. And a lot of that is then having these platforms where young people say, hey, I never actually thought of whether it's countering violent extremism, or whether it's stories around race, whether it's stories around violence, whether it's stories around crime. I never actually thought that this is actually what was going on, and that it was so layered, or that it was so nuanced. And now that motivates me to want to actually go out and look at different sides or different aspects to it as well.